The next of my 10-minute planner screencasts is another Much Ado About Nothing question, and you can see it on the screen in front of you now. In Much Ado About Nothing is a play in which nothing is quite as it seems. Do you agree? This again is a question taken from the Edexcel preparatory material for the certificate examination, but again it's a question which in a variety of ways I think is relevant to a great deal of the potential questions that will arise both at GCSE or A-level. As always with these, if you've listened to any of the others, you're used to the format now. I'll start by telling you what I think is required in the question and then take you through my mind and my process, which will take no longer than 10 minutes to deliver, that being the maximum amount of time that I think you have in most exams to plan your way through an essay. So, first of all, the very fact that it says, do you agree, requires you to evaluate the statement and to give a personal perspective. I wouldn't expect you to necessarily do this throughout the essay, but certainly in the final concluding paragraph, I would expect a clear indication of whether you agree or disagree. And I would also suggest that there isn't a right answer. And it's worth remembering that. We might want to think about a good contrast in our writing so that we can really balance the arguments that we're producing. And we should also be very careful to make sure we show knowledge of the plot and also discuss the plot from a point of view that clearly shows an awareness of Shakespeare's decisions and choices in the writing of the play. These are not real people and the events did not take place. I've underlined it because it is sad how often one reads essays talking about people making decisions as though they are real, functioning flesh and blood. Ideally, for the higher levels, you need to be keenly aware of the idea that you're looking at creations created for a purpose by a writer who has made choices in order to do so. I think if I was writing this essay in an exam, I'd probably have a three-part structure, something along these lines. I would want to show that I understood the nature of noting in this play. If things are not going to be as they seem, that's because we possibly haven't looked closely enough at them. I would then move on to looking at the things that are misnoted before perhaps looking at the things that should really be taken at face value and where perhaps there haven't been errors. And then I think I would end up with something not unlike this. In my introduction and moving forward at the start of the essay, I'd be focusing on noting, and probably I would make it very clear that I understood at least one of the various layers of the title, that of noting, Much Ado About Noting, as the play would have been pronounced. To note is to see clearly, and if this title is telling us that the whole play is about an ability to see through the confusion and to see clearly, then you could argue that the title supports the thesis that is the question of this essay. I might want to look at key moments of misnoting or noting issues. In Act 1, Scene 1, Claudio is one of the first people to use the word note when he and Benedick have been left on their own. Incidentally, I'm not going to give you the quotations in this one. That's for you to be thinking about and for you to work out. But Claudio asks if Benedick did note Hero. Benedick replies that he didn't do it. He said he saw her but noted her not. And right at the beginning of the play, we see that there is a difference being clearly made by Shakespeare between seeing something and noting something. We see this. Yes, it perhaps affects the way the characters develop after this point, but Shakespeare wants us to notice this. We also notice in Act 4, Scene 1, the wedding scene, when everybody is losing their head one way or another. It's the friar, as the voice of calm, who says that he noted Hero. And again, he is able to say that the blushing that is being talked about as an indicator of guilt is not an indicator of guilt at all. It is, well, an indication of misery or sorrow. To Don Pedro, the rest of them, there seems to be a single answer to everything. What you see is what you get. But the friar shows that everything isn't always as clear, if you like, as that rather shallow interpretation. This idea that there has to be another way of seeing things. So if we take this and we then move on in our essay perhaps to showing agreement with the thesis, all is not as it appears. We're working in the theme of deceit, I think, or appearance and reality, if you prefer. And I divide deceit into good deceit and bad deceit, or in the case of this, bad deceit and good deceit. And maybe a key theme, in this is this notion of bad deceit. The whole plot hinges on the antique comic trope of a heroine being discredited, and then at some point being found to have been discredited and everything turning out all right. Pedro and Claudio believe the evidence of their eyes. They make no attempt to find the truth. They see what they see, and they go with it. Now, all is not as it appears. As far as they're concerned, Hero appears guilty. I wonder if she is. The good deceit element, of course, probably focuses and centres around Benedick and Beatrice and the gulling in Act 2-3 and 3-1. Pedro Leonato leading that in terms of Benedick. Benedick believes only what he hears, as does Beatrice. Again, they don't talk to each other directly at this stage. They've overheard people talking about the fact they're in love, and they instantly believe it. And this is one of the points that we will develop a bit later on, because it seems to me there's a really lovely layer of dramatic irony here. The audience know that they are being tricked. They don't. The curious thing about this deceit, of course, is that everything is as it appears, because they do love each other. It's just that at the moment they haven't had a chance to say so. But to Benedick, the thesis holds true. All is not as it appears. So we're beginning to work on agreement now. Maybe we agree, I don't know, with this thesis. All is not as it appears. Let's think about the misnotings that there are, and we can begin to rattle them off. Borachio leading the tricking of Claudio back in the early acts. Evidence of many misnotings in the early acts, which is partly a requirement for a comedy, but there are too many for this just to be that. And I've listed 6 here. The wedding, we are told at one stage, is between Pedro and Hero. That is a mistake. All is not as it appears. There is the masked ball, an entire scene, Act 2, Scene 1, where very definitely all is not as it appears. Everybody in that is deliberately tricking each other, and Shakespeare has used that act to deliberately set up a whole mass of sort of red herrings and tensions around the play. The gulling of Beatrice and Benedick we've talked about. Pedro and Claudio are tricked by John's plan. In Act 3, Scene 2, Claudio very quick to say, well, I'll shame her if she's done anything wrong. But the point is, they are taken, we don't see it, they believe the evidence of their eyes. All is not as it appears, because Hero, of course, is innocent. It just doesn't appear like that. At the second wedding, this theme of the masked ball returns, with Hero and the girls veiled, so that there's a sense that, again, all is not quite as it appears. There is uncertainty here. And that all adds up to a fairly solid agreement with the thesis of the title. However, there is another side. A lot of the things that are part of the deceit do come true. Beatrice and Benedick are able to state their love for one another, and they end up married. It may start as a deceit, but it ends up as truth. Beatrice is a character who throughout the play should be taken at face value. She is always true. She is always clear. She is a major character who says exactly what she intends and acts accordingly throughout the entire play. And if you think about that, you will see how that works. She doesn't deceive. She doesn't lie. She doesn't lead people on. She just is. There's also this business I touched on earlier, the dramatic irony. There is a depth to the writing because of this. The audience, for example, know that Hero is innocent. And so we get this idea that we trust ourselves. We are not deceived at all. As an audience, the characters are, but the audience is. And within the play itself, the high-status characters are indeed fooled. For them, everything is not as it appears. But the low-status characters despite the fact that everything Dogberry says is almost unintelligible, are not deceived because they know the truth. It takes a long time to get it for comic effect. So I suppose the point that I'm beginning to come round to here is that Much Ado About Nothing is a play in which all is not as it seems for some people some of the time. There is a clear strand of deceit which runs through the play, and deceit which is deliberately hiding the truth, and particularly in the case of John, deliberately seeking to cause trouble by hiding the truth. On the other hand, the audience are aware of it. So for the audience, much of what appears is exactly what appears and what it seems. For the characters, it isn't. Now, you need a verdict at the end. And I think my verdict is based on this fact, that whilst, I agree totally, a lot of the time, for a lot of people involved in the play, everything is not as it seems. That's the whole point of noting, and you have to make this noting point again and again. But for a lot of the people, and for the audience, there is real clarity as to what is going on. We know that Claudio is basing his accusation on what he has seen, and our view is clear. We know Hero to be innocent, even though Claudio may think something else. And we tend to see him as the fool, not as the hero of his own little drama. So I think if I was writing this essay, my final verdict would probably come down to disagree. But there is no right answer. And taking the examiner through a clear path of discussion of the play to reach your verdict is actually the important thing here, not the specific verdict that you reach.